Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How is everybody this morning?
Very good. I'm trying anyway.
Hi, Donna. Wave if you can hear us.
I told Joyce a while back, they can't hear, and we realized this, so you can't hear when someone's out in the audience.
Yeah.
Sometimes, but sometimes you can't hear who's even at the speaker. And I told her she had trouble, they had trouble hearing to hold her hand up to her ear like this, but I'd watched for it.
Right. Okay. VBS is still on for July the 26th through the 30th. And Movies by Moonlight are scheduled for Friday, July the 30th. And that's going to be National Treasure. We've got Family Swim Night coming up, July the 25th. That's going to be from 6 to 8 p.m. It's a private event for members and guests of Cross Church in North Richland Hills. And it will be a cost of $3 per person or $10 per family. New members class is a one-time class designed to help new members, people wanting to understand more about our vision and mission. During the class, they'll be provided with information about our basic Baptist doctrines and beliefs and share opportunities to use their gifts and talents. Sunday, August the 8th will be our next opportunity for a new members class. So we can stop by the Encouragers Room to express your interest. And leadership camp, our annual leadership camp. Jeremy sent out a message this past week, and will be on the North Richland Hills campus Sunday, August the 8th from 4 to 8 p.m. and dinner will be provided. And we're still looking for people to serve in our audio visual team, working behind the scenes. And so anyone interested can stop by the Encourager Room and jump on board. We're glad to have Kay and Henry back with us. Yeah, we missed you guys. Anybody have any prayer requests or any updates to our prayer requests that we need to do?
I texted Donna too to see how she was doing, and she had texted me the week before that she was going to be at her daughter's last Sunday. But apparently they went to Branson, and she asked if we please pray for them as they travel back from Branson today.
Okay, we will do that.
Are we late?
No, but if you'd like for me to go through all the announcements again, I'll be glad to. Okay. Pastor Jeremy and Lauren, we are so glad to have y'all.
Let's do announcements.
We've done it.
Oh, you're
We've
done?
done it.
Okay,
We're
well,
turning
then-
it over to you.
All right. Hey everyone, how's it going? Who's joining us? Hey, McCarsons, how are y'all? Good to see you. All right.
And you can't see Donna.
It may have frozen. They're not even moving. It's definitely frozen. Oh, there it is. There's a little move. I see a smile. Okay. Good to see you. All right. Well, how's everybody doing? You should know by now, this is my usual routine of come around and check and see how you're doing, especially after a big announcement. And just kind of open the floor. If you got any questions, feel free to ask. I'm an open book. If you don't want to ask anything in public and would rather do that in private, that's fine too. I'll be around all day, all week. August 1st will be my last Sunday to celebrate VBS and some baptisms that are going to take place. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, anything I can help.
What will your responsibilities be at NRH?
Yeah, so mine will be exactly what Stuart Pendle's are currently. So we're literally just flipping places. So in charge of adult ministries, small groups, adults, assimilation. So getting everybody through baptism, new members, all, plugged into the church, men's ministry, some evangelism stuff, and anything else is assigned by the pastor. So I'd like this to not be recorded, but no, anything that Danny Roberts doesn't want to do that needs to happen, it comes out of Scott Mays' mouth. So that's my job description. Yeah. We've all been there. We know what that's like. So. But
just a word of thanks, Jeremy, to you and Lauren. How much y'all have given and sacrificed and supported and helped with the growth of Cross Church. Just thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, no sacrifice on our part. It's been our pleasure to be here.
He's the first pastor here.
I'm not. I'm the second. We don't like to talk about the dark years. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Okay.
You can text him and say I said that. It'll be fine. That's fine. No. So originally there was Mark Spence came on when the campus really started, officially started. He was here for 2 years and went off to be a senior pastor. We're still at Mississippi Avenue Baptist Church in Colorado. It's not in this. It makes no sense. I don't understand that. This day I'm like, dude, you need to rename your church. This is a terrible name. You're in Colorado. It's named Mississippi. So he's been there since. I was originally at the NRH campus as the Minister of Missions, local outreach. I don't know, like 50 things, all those kind of things. And when he stepped out to go be a lead pastor, I transitioned into this role. And so I've been here 5 years as of July 4th. So, good question. Anything at all?
Well,
Oh, I'm gonna miss y'all too.
I'll be the first to say we love you two guys, and you will be missed. I know you're gonna be where you're gonna be.
Yeah, I'm still around.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's gonna be
Hope
different.
you'll be out sometimes and preach here too, just like.
Yeah, and maybe that'll be the case. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
One of the things he didn't mention, Chris Osborne will still be here. So he'll still be kind of responsible for 3/4 of the preaching. It's kind of what it averages out to. But instead of me being up there the other times, it'll be Stuart Pendle now as the campus pastor. So you guys are going to love Stuart. He's a great friend of mine. They're amazing. You're getting the better end of this deal. You just don't know it yet. I just ask you wait the 3-month mourning period and say it behind my back. That's all I ask. Praise God, Jeremy's gone. We got Stuart Pendle. That's all I have. 3-month mourning. Okay. That's all I ask for.
Betty shared with me this morning that y'all are really good friends, and that means a lot that you're
We are
working together as part of the team within the church.
Absolutely. So, well, feel free to come chat with me, talk to me, Scott, as well. If you've got a worship guide, you have my cell phone number. If you're on Realm, which you should be, you have my contact info. I'm still here for a couple more weeks. I'm not dead yet. Don't excommunicate us yet. So we'll be here Sunday, August 1st, and that'll be our last one. And then we'll be over there because leadership camp starts and it's the beginning of the school year and hit the ground running over there, just like Pendle's going to hit the ground running over here. So love you guys. Got a couple of weeks left together. So I'm sorry you have to put up with me for that long. But all right. let y'all continue.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll wait, I'll wait.
Well. Okay.
Joyce, can you and TD hear okay?
William
I
asked
heard a
them.
little bit of yes.
William,
Well,
you ask.
huh?
Ask them if they can hear okay.
Yeah, can y'all hear okay? Everybody hearing okay?
Yeah,
They're all saying okay. Well, I can't hear good, so, but anyway, that's not the fault of the speaker system. That's just me. You know, we finished Ecclesiastes and pretty well concluded that Solomon was just saying, hey, whatever God gives you, food, drink, peace, he said, enjoy it, thank God for it, trust in him, and everything else is vanity. uh, so I used to tell my students, I said, you know, what's more real, spiritual things that we can't see or material things that we can? Well, God is a spirit. He made the material things. So which would be more real? The material things are all going to pretty well come to an end, but God's eternal. And I have my own special kind of way to think about eternity, because eternity, there's no yesterday, there's no tomorrow, there's now. So eternity is always present. And that's kind of, if you try to think about that, you know, we live in a linear world. There was yesterday, there's today, we hope for tomorrow. We remember things that happened years ago. It's linear, but eternity is not linear. Eternity is present, eternally. That's a little difficult to wrap your head around if you try to think about it a lot. It's kind of like we used to lay out on the road. Our little town, when the sun went down, it pretty well rolled up the sidewalks. Everybody went to bed.
They didn't have sidewalks.
It really didn't.
They were
Proverbially, they didn't. But you look up at the stars, and out in the country, you know, you could just see goodles of stars on clear nights, and you'd think there's no end to space. It's hard to wrap your head around. But anyway, Job kind of takes off on a thought. You know, a lot of people think that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. But if we pause a minute and think about that, we know that's not right, because we do know that bad things do happen to good people. And good people do prosper. In fact, if you go look over at Psalm 73, he said his foot almost slipped because he was envious of the wicked, how they prospered. And so, you know, good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. Not all the time, but it does happen. The story of Job probably took place, I think, maybe around the same time as Abraham. It wasn't in Israel, probably more over toward Persia. We're not real sure where this says is a land of Uz, U-Z. I don't think they're really sure where Uz was. It was so long ago, it's been called probably a dozen things at least since then. But we do know that Job was a real person. He wasn't just a long proverbial story that was departing truth, because Ezekiel mentions Job, or in Ezekiel 14. James in the New Testament also mentions the person Job. So it seems that he was a real person. He was, for one moment at least, he was healthy, wealthy, successful businessman, a dedicated father, godly man. And the next moment, bandits raided, the storms came, and he had lost everything. Now, when it talks about him being a wealthy person in those days, it probably wasn't money in the bank. It was cattle, goats, sheep, camels. That was his wealth. And then he had, in fact, it says in that early verse says he had servants without number. So at that time, he may have been one of the richest people in the world, kind of like Solomon was supposedly the wisest person that ever lived. All his children get killed. His body becomes infected with terrible sores from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. The only thing he ends up left is his life and his wife. And I think she was part of his affliction, as we read. Not that elder wives are always part of the affliction, it's just that his wife was. Probably why Satan left him or her alone, you know. But, you know, how did he respond to this tragedy? What did Job do because of all the bad things that happened to him? And what we're going to be looking at as we study Job is, you know, what can we learn from it? One thing that Job did when all this happened, what was the first thing he did? Said he worshiped God. He says, you know, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I'll depart. The Lord gives and the Lord's taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. He worshiped God. But he also got angry with God. Now, he still trusted God, but he was angry with God because he didn't think that what was happening to him was justified. In his culture in that time, and you're going to see from his three friends, they all declare, boy, you must have blown it somewhere. You must have really done something bad. And I would have guessed that Job considered that. And then after he considered it, he knew he hadn't, and he just says, nope. I don't know what happened, but I'm still going to trust God. But he does get angry. I think, you know, one of the things that we can learn from this is how to deal with unexpected times of suffering and loss. You know, when you're suffering, it kind of reveals how real your relationship is with God. How pure your trust of God really is. And the commentary that I read said one of the keys to that is keeping your eyes on eternity, not on the things here and people here. You know, God allows suffering to happen in the lives of believers to test the reality of our faith, but even more so to test our love for him. And it's hard to fake your love when you're hurting. When you're in pain, it'd just be very difficult to fake love. Job said, though, when in all of his pain, he said, though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. That's going to be way over in chapter 13. So it's pretty far into the story. The first few chapters kind of serve as a prologue to introduce us to some of the main characters and setting up the storyline. Verse 1, in fact, verse 1, the last part of it would make a great epitaph on your tombstone. But it says there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Would you like it on your tombstone that says, hey, Will was a man that feared God and turned away from evil? He was upright, feared God, and turned away from evil. That'd be a pretty good epitaph. You know, he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And then it goes on to count the all the sheep and camels and oxen and donkeys and servants, and said he was the greatest of all the people of the East. So Solomon was the wisest, Job's the greatest. What do we learn from these two guys? Um, and looking at chapter 1, verses about, well, I guess about 6 down to 22, we find Satan coming into the picture. And then you find him again in chapter 2, the first 6 verses. And Satan kind of sets the plot of the whole story into motion. So, you know, that's kind of where we start off, and where our lesson started off was in verse 6. And if you would, let's just follow along. I printed up the deals, but I'm just going to go ahead and read, and we'll go from there. It said, and the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? And Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he'll curse you to your face. Now, that's Satan's proposal. Now, you know, there's a couple of interesting things here that sometimes I don't think we've thought of very much, but what else? Satan has access to God and God's throne. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, you know, he's not going to be thrown into the bottomless pit and sealed until the judgment, the end times. So he's still free, evidently, to even go before God's throne, as he is. It says he's walking and roaming the earth, walking up and down, to and fro on the earth. That kind of unexpected, in a sense, that you find out that Satan can appear before God. He's the great accuser. He kind of, in a court role, he would be the prosecution. He's always trying to condemn. But you also find that God's sovereign in all things. Satan can't do anything beyond what God will give him permission to do. So
I just think it's kind of interesting how the devil says something, actually says something in the Bible.
Huh?
The devil actually speaks in the Bible.
Yeah, he does. I think he speaks a lot more in our lives than what we like to imagine. What's that old book about the demons and Satan that's been famous for a long time? I'll think of it later. It's a good little story, but it's this demon that's in charge of trying to lead somebody astray, and he's reporting back to the senior demon, and the senior demon is giving him advice about how to deal with people. But anyway, I don't know why I can't think of that one. That's a good one. But you know, another thing that you find here, God found no fault with Job, but Satan did. Satan always tries to find fault with God's people. That's part of his nature. He's the accuser of God's people. He doesn't find any good in us. And he always wants to point out and bring up the bad in us so that we feel guilty and put down. So, you know, that's and Satan's attack on Job was really an attack on God. It wasn't just Job he's after God and God's nature. Satan was saying something like, if we just put it in everyday language, the only reason Job fears you is you pay him to do it. You two have a contract. You protect him and prosper him so long as he obeys you and worships you. You have to pay people to worship you. That's Satan's accusation. Satan was saying that Job is more interested in the gifts than he was the giver. And he said, if you stop giving, he's going to stop worshiping you. He's going to stop following you. And so that kind of sets up the story and what's going to happen. And as we know from these early verses in chapter 1, Job was very wealthy, and God had blessed everything that he touched. He was wealthy. He had a large, beautiful family. What was it? 7 boys and 3 girls. And he, they loved him and he loved them. And, if all of this was removed, Satan says his faith would crumble. He wouldn't, in fact, he says he would curse you to your face. Well, that, does, and we got to realize even Jesus in his parables pointed out that God does reward people for their faith when they place their trust in him and when they serve God right. There's going to be rewards. However, if you go back and look through all the Old Testament and New Testament, most of the people that were followers of God weren't rich. In fact, a lot of them were very poor and a lot of them were very persecuted. And so, lest we think the prosperity gospel is in effect, don't think so. There are some today that preach, if you follow God and you do what God commands and you live for God, that God will bless you and you'll have wealth and prosperity and everything will be good. I mean, this story pretty well shoots that one down in spades. It's already.
The ones that have wealth and prosperity tend to be the one that preach that.
Yeah, I think I saw something on the news about that just this last week, and one of them that preaches that was getting a very big reward of some transportation. Anyway, there's really only ever been one truly righteous person to ever walk the earth. And when God says there that, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him. He's blameless and upright, fears God and turns away from evil. Well, he's not saying that Job was perfect. He's not saying that Job was sinless. I mean, what Paul writes to the church at Rome and says there's none righteous, no, not one. We're all sinners. That's still in effect. And the only way to get right is how?
Through Jesus.
Through Jesus. Faith in Jesus Christ. So don't misread this about Job. He was not perfect. He said, in fact, a little later in the story, you're going to find he talks about and tells and confesses some of his bad. And so we'll maybe see that in one of these lessons, although they skip pretty far between lessons. I just was noticing. And right down in verse 12, the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hands. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of God. So Satan came before God as the adversary of this righteous man of God. And in this case, God allowed Satan to follow through with his proposal with that one condition. Against him, do not stretch out your hand. Satan had permission to touch everything else, but he couldn't touch the life of Job. So You know, you got to stop and think though, why would God allow a righteous man who feared God and obeyed God and worshiped God, why would he allow Satan to take everything that he had like that? Isaiah 55:9 is a pretty good verse to remember. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Why do bad things happen to good people? Boy, you know, sometimes it's beyond our ability to think about. But have you gone through some bad times years ago and now look back on them and find that was a real turning point that set you on a whole different track than what you were thinking of, and God used it in a good way in your life? I know of one time that I was probably in depression in our mission for about 2 years after action they took that I did not like, appreciate, and agree with. Took away a ministry that I'd had and it was quite going very well, and given it to an organization that I thought would destroy it. But little did I know what God had in store in the future. And it turned out that he gave me something better, but it was a while in coming. We know from scripture that God's intrinsically good. But you could read this passage and make yourself wonder, you know, about the goodness of God. When Satan is attacking and when bad things are happening, we can still hang on to that thought that God's good. Don't they have a little song about that? Yeah. That was a favorite for years in the Philippines. They sang it until you almost got nauseous. But, I mean, not that the words was bad or nothing. It's just that it's over and over and over for 43 times. I mean, you know, after a while, I get the idea. Let's move on. Anyway, you know, this whole process of us being sanctified and growing in spirit and in grace and knowledge of the Lord, it's a process. It doesn't just happen like that. You know, you wish maybe that when you got saved, bam, you just turned into a beautiful, spiritual, godly, sinless person for the rest of your life. Again, the buzzer happens. It just doesn't seem to work that way. God works in mysterious ways and does things in our life that we have to deal with, and many of those difficult times are some of the times that he grows us the most. It was said by somebody made the comment, says, yeah, sometimes God has to knock you flat of your back to get you to look up. And that happens. And then it goes on down to verses 13 down to 19, telling what happened. God gives Satan permission to touch all that he has, all that Job has. And then it says in verse 13, now there was a day when the sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, wow, I mean, bam, 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 just, I mean, there came another and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they're dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Man, I mean, you could have had a dump truck and dumped a load of rocks out on Job and not hurt him as much. You know, it's interesting, the first and third tragedies were executed by the hands of men, and the second and fourth were caused by natural disasters. I guess that wind that came out of the desert must have been like a tornado that just came down and destroyed the house and killed all his kids. I think he could have stood losing all of his camels and his cattle and his sheep and all of that. I mean, that kind of wealth can eventually be replaced. He was a smart man, evidently a hardworking man. He could have rebuilt that, but it also destroyed all his servants, except for the 4 that came back reporting that only they were left. And I'm not sure they would have stayed with him long, because he had nothing to pay them anymore. He didn't have any way to reward them anymore. You know, when each messenger was speaking, there came another. And if we look over there back in that first few verses, what do you have? 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. Probably no one else had all that much in those days. Still kind of probably a nomadic lifestyle, but Job was very, very wealthy. You know, Satan's proposal was, remember, that none of God's people love him as much as they love themselves. That they wouldn't love God if he didn't protect them and prosper them. And so the central issue here in Job is one of these things about the integrity of faith in spite of suffering. Job gets hit from all sides. Now, you know, we're aware of what what Satan and God talked about, but Job doesn't know. He has no idea why all this is happening to him. It's just out of the blue, boom, the world falls in. And he's just lost, doesn't have any idea of why this would be happening. And in the thought of that day, he probably had to consider, did I do something wrong? Did I do something against God? Did I blow it somehow so that I deserve this? And I think as he considered it, then he decided, no, I've worshiped God. I've even given sacrifices for my children. When they finished these parties, evidently these parties, you know, were maybe like a week or so long. They were birthday parties, evidently. And so each of the 9 sons, as they had birthdays, they would throw a party for about a week and then invite the others. So about 10 weeks a year, they partied. And when you party and you drink the wine and all, you might get a little tipsy and you might do something that would be bad. In fact, Job said, in case they cursed God, you know, he would offer the sacrifices for each of his children. And he wanted to make sure that they were covered. He loved his kids, and now they're gone. I don't know if there's any way to imagine what all could have gone through Job's mind. I mean, what would go through your mind if all of a sudden you lost all your, for us, retirement benefits, you lost your bank account, you lost your home, you lost your car, everything was gone, you're left sitting on the curb, a street person, your kids died, you don't have anybody left. What would you think? I don't know if I would. I think I might just sit there numb. I mean, you know, you'd just be so devastated. But, you know, Job, look at verse 20 to 22. Job's reaction. I think after Job got hit by all of this and he stopped to consider that what he might have done and decided he didn't know what was going on, but he still believed in God, trusted God, knew God was good. And he says, Job rose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshiped. Now, tearing your gown and shaving your head were signs of mourning in those days. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all of this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong, and Satan pulled his proverbial hair out. No, that's not in there, but I think Satan must have been really upset that Job turned around after all of that. Job falls down and worships God. That's a real blow to Satan. Job was brought to his knees. I think he was brought flat to the ground, really. But he rose and tore his robe and shaved his hair, shaved his head. And you know, he just seemed to accept the fate and the knowledge that, yeah, God maybe's brought all of this on me, but I don't know why. But praise the Lord. Says he worshiped the God who had taken all these things from him, because it was really God's to give and God's to take. And so yeah, I like that. You know, it was much like the teacher in Ecclesiastes, Solomon. He says as he came from his mother's womb, he'd go again naked as he came, and he'd take nothing for the toil that he may carry away in his hand, back in Ecclesiastes 5. He agrees here with Job. He says, I didn't bring anything into the world. I'm going to take nothing out. Doesn't even matter if they put it in the casket or not. You're still not going to take it with you. That statement in verse 21, he says, you know, the Lord gives and the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Everything that we do have really comes from God. What gives and what God gives and what God takes away is up to his sovereign will. We really absolutely have no control on that. We think we do. I mean, we put it in the bank. We might insure it, but it's still that God gives and God can take away. You know, and if we only loved God for what he gave to us, then what are we really loving? We're loving ourselves more than we're loving him. You know, the giver of our earthly gifts is much greater than the gifts that he gives. And that's where we need to keep our thought. You know, in a sense, this kind of points forward to Jesus. You know, you can see that Jesus suffered innocently the wrath of God in order to refute the accusations of the accuser. He suffered so that we wouldn't have to face that eternal separation from God. So, you know, Job's response to all that tragedy sounds really great, but how real would that be in your circumstance? If you lost everything and even your kids and people you love, would you be able to have the attitude that Job did? Well, that's one of the big lessons of Job, the big encouragements of Job. There are a few biblical truths that serve as a foundation for Job's response. You know, God's, we understand, is creator of all, upholder of all, giver of all. So if he gives or he takes away, that doesn't make him any less in control or any more in control. He's in absolute control. And if we trust in him, in the long run, life's really short. In reality, compared to eternity, I mean, life is just almost like that, and it's gone. Look down at Job. This latter part, he says, then Job rose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshiped and said, naked I came from my mother's womb and naked I shall return. The Lord gives and the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And what we're going to find is that since Satan wasn't successful by just taking all that he owned, he comes back before God again. And you notice that term that it says, the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. What's it mean? Commentators say that it means angels, that the angels, God created the angels. So in that sense, they're children of God. And so he talks about the sons of God presented himself before the Lord, and Satan came again and presented himself. Then in this second chapter, and same thing, he's been going to and fro on the earth and walking up and down it. And he still, God says, hey, have you noticed my servant Job? How he's still blameless and upright and fears God and turns away from evil? Even though you've done all this to him, he still fears God and turns away from evil. Even though you've incited me against him to destroy him without reason. And then Satan says, well, skin for skin. All that a man has, he'll give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and flesh, and he'll curse you to your face. And so God allows him to touch his body. But he says, but don't take his life. So he still is Satan's only act so far as God will allow him. So that's a good thing in our own lives. You know, when those same bad things happen, yeah, maybe God's allowed Satan to do some bad stuff in our lives. He's going to use that to make us grow know him better, depend on him more. But he said, when he touches your own flesh, you know anybody that's been really touched unexpectedly in their flesh, that's endangered their life and incapacitated them on and on? Yeah. And if you don't, it's not hard to find stories of people like that easily. We've had, what was the gal, the Christian gal that was an athlete and fell and broke her neck, and
Johnny.
yeah,
Johnny.
and you know, can't hardly move her hands or feet or anything. She paints pictures with putting a brush in her mouth and goes. I had a buddy in high school that broke his neck, and he could move his hands a little like that, and he could move his arms, but basically from neck down, he didn't move much of anything. But he'd weave a pencil in it, and he could type about 30 words a minute. And for most of his life, adult life, he ran a business machines company, sold business machines. But I think, you know, wow, to be like Charlie, a good athlete, good looking, love people, life of the party, and then bam, dove off the side of the boat, hit something and broke his neck and never moves again. You can get bitter or you can get better. I guess Job got better. You know, he stands up and sits in the ashes and scrapes himself with a broken piece of pottery. And what does his wife say?
Curse God and die.
Curse God and die. You miserable thing, just put yourself out of mercy, out of misery. Just curse God and die.
Are we not sure that it wasn't her that she wanted to put out of her misery rather than God?
Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe she wanted to be put out of her misery than him. Maybe kind of like what the pastor said today in the message. So and Satan's, Job's response, he says, you speak as one of the foolish women should speak or would speak. Shall we receive good from God and shall we not receive evil? And in all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. Job still remains faithful. And
a person that comes to mind, have y'all heard of the guy who has no limbs, no arms, no legs? Nick Vujicic or something like that?
Mhm.
Has a worldwide ministry, has no arms and no legs, and does incredible God work around the world. He could have cursed God. Why was I born this way?
yeah,
But he has a tremendous ministry. It's just an amazing story to watch what he does and how he shares Christ around the world.
yeah. I've seen him on video
Yeah.
before, and he kind of gets up on this table thing on the stage where people can see him,
Right.
and has a speaker, and yeah, by his attitude and his talks and teaching, you'd think there was nothing wrong with him at all. I mean, you know, he has a better attitude than I do most of the time. You know, I think he's just, you know, just very positive, built up guy.
He was at Promise Keepers at Arlington this past Friday and Saturday.
Okay, that's really something to come through that kind of thing. But you know, it's that's the thing. Adversity, hard times, are really the things that tend to grow us more than good times. It's kind of like I've told you about the story of one of our missionary administrator guys going through China, and walked in a park, had an agreement to meet with one of these underground church pastors. And he mentioned to the pastor, said, you know, we pray for y'all that you'll get more freedom and things here in China. And the pastor kind of reached and grabbed his arm and says, no. The adversity is what makes us strong. We pray for you in America because you're persecuted by prosperity. And I think, you know, when times are good, we sometimes kind of forget about God. It's when the rough times come that we turn to God. I think that's one reason that for some of us that's worked overseas a lot and have seen a lot of people in the other parts of the world who are, compared to us, most of them, 90% of them, are worse off than what we would call dirt poor. I mean, they just very poor. But some of the most beautiful spiritual people I've known are some of the poorest people I've known. Frankly, because they don't have anything else to depend on. When somebody's sick, when tragedy happens, they're praying. They're praising and loving the Lord. And I think sometimes in America, we get so wrapped up in our prosperity and our good things and our good food and our good houses and our ability to travel and go and do and be, so that we often just neglect and forget about God. So as we look at Job, we're going to find some lessons about what happens when bad things happen to good people. What should our actions and attitudes be? And I think it's kind of especially fun when Job gets mad at God and then God finally comes back and speaks to Job. That's near the end, but we won't get ahead of the game. What is it, next week? We skip all the way over to, what was it? Job 14. Yeah. Hope defined. Job 14, verses 1 to 14. Now, if you want to get the whole story, read everything from now to 14. It's an interesting read. Job's friends are, you want to question whether they're really friends or not. Yes.
Well, it's my version in verse 1 said he was a man of perfect integrity. And I have a star and I have him written, I don't know if this came from another sermon or one of your sermons one time, integrity, for parentheses, what holds you together.
Yeah. Integrity is what holds you together.
And we'll just illustrate how it can be gone. And just like that, about a month or two ago, we sold our motorhome. And, it was a sizable transaction. They wired the money to our account and it's there in our account. I get up early, about 5 o'clock the next morning. And the first thing I do, I just go through, check my accounts, make sure everything's okay, credit cards and bank. And I go to that bank, this account is closed, balance zero. The day before, it had substantial amount of money in it, substantial to us. Zero, account closed. Yeah, and I'm thinking, who's got into our bank account? What's happened? And I start doing inquiries on the internet, why could they close my bank account? And there were several reasons why it could have been. Number one is do you have large transactions? Well, I had a large transaction yesterday. But then at 7 o'clock, that was at 5 o'clock when I get up, 7 o'clock, there's a new account opened and there's all the money in the account. I forgot I'd received a letter. They were transitioning from one type of account to another type of account. But for that couple hours, it can be gone.
Kind of a panic there a little bit.
Yeah.
It felt like Joe.
Yeah. What have I done to deserve? But fortunately for us, it was only a couple hours. Judy never even knew because she was still playing.
Yeah, and nowadays with the regulations that they have, you go start transferring large sums of money and you don't kind of explain it to the bank, they might freeze your account.
Yeah.
Not because they necessarily want to or have to, but the federal government.
It's the Patriot Act.
Yeah, well, and you end up with people that are transferring big amounts of money. A lot of times that's drugs, terrorists, things like that. So they watch that. Of course, drug lords and terrorists know that, so they do it underhandedly, stuff. But you can get caught in that when you end up with some big bucks going through. I know, I don't know if anybody listens, but Levin on the radio, Mark Levin, he has a little advertisement that that if you have over a certain size transaction, the banks are required to report that to the federal government.
$10,000.
Yeah, 10 grand. So if you're gonna move $20,000-$30,000, do so at $9,900 and then a $9,900, and then finish it off with.
No, that doesn't work either. That raises the hair on the banker's neck, and he's going to report you for doing it because you're superseding the allowable.
Our daughter in fact, she worked at this bank, Capital One, that did this. And she said, just don't do that. Don't break it up into smaller. Just let them file the report. Because if they file the report, everything's okay. But if you break it up, it's like you're trying to hide something.
So don't break it up unless you are, huh? Well, hopefully that none of us are going to end up and go through what Job is going through. We may have had felt like that in the past sometime in life, but hopefully none of us will face that kind of thing. But I think the bottom line is just we need to kind of think like Job and like the commentary said, instead of looking at the circumstances and depending on the circumstances, think about eternity, think about what God's up to, and depend on Him. And we'll do maybe more like Job. And it's going to be interesting too. Like I said, Job does get angry at God, and he really takes God to task in some of this. It makes interesting reading. But God knows our circumstances, and He knows we're human, and He knows that we may get really put out and disgusted, and we might say things that He knows we don't really mean because we're so angry and upset. He's big enough to handle it.
Perhaps a better journey would be that we each try to take the approach of being so committed to God that God acknowledges our faithfulness. Not that He would put Satan in our lives to try to tear us away like He did Job, but to be regardless of what life throws at us. And just walk that journey through, staying true to God. That's what we've got to do.
Yeah, I remember reading in Fox's Book of Martyrs the stories about a lot of the folks that, especially during the Middle Ages, getting burned at the stake for going against the Roman Catholic Church and things like this. And one of the bishops or something in England wrote a letter to the Pope and told him, said, if we burn any more people at the stake for heresies here in England, we better do so in the cellar, because they die such beautiful lives singing praises to God that more and more people are rallying to their cause. And that was, I think a lot of times when that persecution comes, God gives you of his strength to deal with it. It's one of the things I've often thought about, and in my own case, I ended up running a company and a lot of money. For me, a lot of money anyway was past hands. I don't have any business background, but we went through that period in our churches where we went through and they have things now, but trying to find your spiritual gift. Well, I kind of have to personally think that sometimes God provides you spiritual gifts due to the circumstances of where he puts you and what he wants you to do. Now, I think we have spiritual gifts. I think I have a little bit of a gift of teaching, but when Lord put me in charge of that publishing ministry, he gave me a gift of making money. And honestly, making money was not difficult. That was the big holdback into making Phil Best, CSM, Church Strengthening Ministry. That was the big holdback in getting it to be independent, was that it had to be making enough money to pay its own bills. And honestly, not anybody that I knew of in the mission thought that could ever happen. But the Lord I think he kind of gave me the gift of making it happen. He did it. He just used me, and CSM is still going strong. And even through all the COVID and everything that's happened up there, mainly because I kept insisting that they put back reserves, and they had enough reserves that they've been able to really go for nearly 2 years now on lots lower sales and some cutbacks in employment and employees and payments and stuff. They've had to do all of that, but that's nothing unusual over there. Many businesses have just flat out closed. Many others have done the same thing. They've cut back, and tried to keep it open and keep it going minimally. And so CSM is still going strong, and now they're back up on online sales that are actually paying for their full bill. They're in the black. And I just say, hey, praise the Lord. But not only did he kind of gift me, I think he gifted Abner, who was my assistant, and a sharp Filipino young man. The Philippines is kind of like a lot of tropical countries. Most people can walk out the door and find something to eat. I mean, it's growing all the time, 360 days a year, food's growing. And they can usually find something in these tropical countries to eat. So they don't really have a strong lean toward planning ahead. Northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, you better get ready for the winter. You're not going to grow anything in the winter. So, you harvest your potatoes and your grain and stuff, and you store it. You got to think ahead, or you're going to die when winter comes. So we have that built into our mentality in Northern Hemisphere. Tropics, I don't think so much. They just, because they can always find something to eat. There's always, bananas growing, papayas growing, kamote kahoe, it's a wooden potato, they call it, and it's a root plant. They're always there all the time, everywhere growing. And not in the cities, but out in the country. So, but Abner from the beginning was gifted to project and plan ahead, and at least as good as me, if not better. And so the Lord provided a real good guy to take my place. And he's probably done better than I did. One reason is because it's all Filipino employees, and he's a Filipino, and he knows how to handle them much better than a American Kano. That's what the short. So, well, next week we'll have another dose of Job and try to see what Job's response is to all this tragedy and what we can learn about it if it happens to us, when it happens to us. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for all the good lessons that it teaches us. How it shows us more about you and who you are, and our place and our response, and how we should react to the things of this earth. Just like Solomon said, all these material things are really vanity anyway, that they're not really as real as our worship of you and following you and obeying you and doing what you want and loving you. And we just thank you that you give us this truth and that you help it to work out in our lives. You just continue to pray for those in our class that have some health problems, and all, we just pray that you'd work in their lives and heal families and members. Just continue to be with our country. We just lift up our president and Congress, hope that pray that they'll do some things that'll be right in your sight. Just ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen. Hope y'all all have a great week.
See you next week.
All right.
Okay.